because I refuse to not be first.
Do we do enough? Well, I never shut up about it.
It must have been about 16, 17. We nicked their guilt rings. Right, the bouncer's guilt ring.
This is no good for me. That's the reality. If you want the honest truth, and I see it every day.
Oscar Bevis, IFL TV, proudly sponsored by Blast. Kalle Sauerland joins me here in Bolton. Kalle, it's a massive week. But before we talk boxing, how's things?
Good to see you, King of the North up here today, eh? Fantastic, here in Bolton Wanderers Football Club. I remember coming to the old ground, which is not as nice as this ground. Looking forward to putting on a great show Friday night. Channel 5, Light Heavyweight Championship of the World, Lyndon Arthur against Brian Suarez. Both 90% knockout ratios, pretty identical records, so I think we're in for a treat. 12 fights on the card, the maximum we're allowed in this wonderful country, so it's going to be one hell of a show.
Yeah, it's definitely a card that's going to deliver for the fans, that is for sure. Just talking about Lyndon, how big of a night is this for Lyndon? I kind of don't want to say make or break at the top level, but is there a little bit of a make or break situation in a sense?
Yeah, I mean, you know, we don't want to talk about the break, but we want to talk about us winning on Friday night on Channel 5 in front of, you know, a lot of eyeballs. But it's about, you know, and it's about that step towards, you know, going for the big international names. But I think we all understand and we all agree probably that there's a lot of domestic bust-ups to go through before that happens. What this IBO world title gives us is that sort of top of the pecking order, in my opinion. You know, yes, it's not one of the four, but let's look at who's held it. You know, from Roy Jones, Chad Dawson at this weight class. Then you look at, you know, Golovkin, Klitschko, and many more who've held this belt. So it's a big opportunity. It sort of puts him a bit ahead in the pecking order of you know, of the Buatsis, the Dan Azizes, you know, all great boxers. You know, obviously Anthony Yard as well. So you've got that sort of Super 4. You know, I love a Super Series, a Super 6, Super 4 in the domestic scene. I think Callum Smith, through his, you know, winning world titles, has you know, is beyond that. He's on the international level, and he's not that these guys aren't on the international level, but just in terms of making those big fights. You know, there's been a lot of talk about obviously Buatsi not taking the B-Vol offer. No one knows. You know, it's always when there's a negotiation, you don't know every side of the story. But at the same time, I think that there's, you know, everyone wants to have measuring sticks, and you normally do those at domestic level. And for the fans, there's going to be some great fights at light heavyweight, you know.
Yeah, we can't wait for them fights. In terms of this one, obviously, you spoke about the prestigious kind of history behind the IBO. It does have its pulling weight when it comes to making fights. And I spoke to Lyndon before, and he said, I don't want to scrape through the fight, but he said, I probably won't be able to. We're looking at a man, when you've got a knockout ratio like that, you can't scrape through this fight. You're going to have to fight fire. You're going to have to fight fire.
This is, you know, if you're a betting man, you wouldn't put it going at points. They both got close to 90%.
The judge's own.
90%, 90, yeah, well, I'd like to. 90% knockout ratios. You know, very similar records, almost identical records. So it's one of those ones, you know, when you've got an Argentinian, you know it's going to be a tough night. But it's rare that you see the Argentinian with such a high knockout ratio. So it's going to be interesting. And we're not looking past Friday, but of course, you know, as a promoter, it's difficult not to look at what could come out of it.
Yeah. In terms of Joshua Buatsi, who you mentioned, I do kind of want to go over what he says, because at the moment you sit in the UK with the platform that has the most eyes. Obviously, he said what he said about DAZN. I just kind of want to know how you take that, because obviously Joshua Buatsi is a big name in this country, and if he stayed on DAZN, he still would have been. But just kind of his move to Sky and what he said and the things between him and Eddie, do you kind of side with Joshua Buatsi in a sense? Because like I said, you sit on a place where you have the biggest eyes. So do you understand the platform talk from Joshua?
Well, first of all, I like Joshua Buatsi. I think he's a very good boxer, and I think he's a cracking human being. That's the first thing I'd say before I talk business. I'd say the comments about DAZN is I don't know. I'm not sure where they came from because DAZN's put on some of the biggest fights at light heavyweight. You know, Bivol, Canelo, to name one in the last 12 odd months, and they've got Bivol, Canelo, Callum Smith, a lot of light heavyweights, and have invested heavily in that division. So, not saying that anyone's better than anyone, but you've also got to look at like who's making an effort with the sport, and DAZN has put a lot of money into this sport and puts on a lot of very good events. So I think they do a cracking job. I think, by the way, I think Sky does a great job of boxing as well, and BT as well. And listen, you know, I think the bickering about networks, I think it's terrible, because anyone who wants to give our sport a platform is fantastic, you know, and let's just rather enjoy it, you know. You know, DAZN has got a cracking lineup coming up next week with Anthony Joshua Franklin. We can say what we want, but it's going to be an interesting fight, that. And they've got a huge calendar. Sky's also got some really good fights coming up, and so does BT. So, you know, as a fan, you know, I don't think we really care. So I'll take my promoter hat off for a minute. We don't really care. The best, of course, is if you know, have Channel 5, but it's only so far, of course, that they can push things as well, and you have to work with all the networks, and you know, that's clear as well. So I think the comments, and I was a bit surprised because I think, like I said before, I think Josh is a great human being, but he have his reasons for making those comments, but I do think that DAZN does a fantastic job at boxing, that's for sure, putting on the big fights.
I suppose it just kind of looks like a decision that I guess works for both. Now, putting the promoter's hat back on, which one of the domestic fights is the tastiest to you? I think most people are going to say Anthony, simply because of the history. I
mean, there's the call for the third fight, isn't there? You know, to make
trilogy for the IBO.
Trilogy, and you know, while I say that they're all very good, I do think they've all got another gear to shift up. And you know, Anthony was found out short now with Beterbiev, put on a great show, but came up a bit short. And I think those fights at domestic level will also be learning fights to go into those Beterbiev and Bivol fights, or Canelo even. So I think they serve a dual purpose. Not only they probably, you know, they're good paydays, you know, it's a business for them, but also, you know, in terms of eyeballs, you know, going back to what we just discussed about about Buatsi, the right fights will always attract big eyeballs on all platforms. It doesn't really matter where. You've got a big fight in boxing, and it will sell. That's what boxing does. But nothing better than cracking domestic bust-ups, you know. And I've got a big smile on my face because I like to be in the middle of those. No, that's the goal. So any of them, but at the same time, we've spoken to Dan Aziz's people. We haven't spoken to Frank about Anthony Yard yet. We're not looking past this week. Is that a fight we could make? Yeah, I've made loads of fights with Frank over the years, and I'm sure we'll continue to do so. He's a great promoter with a great platform, and we like to consider ourselves the same.
100%, it's an interesting division. I can't wait to see how the next year pans out. How much of the Fury-Usyk stuff have you been keeping up with since this morning? There's kind of been developments, it feels like every half hour, and then Frank and Alex are on TalkSport.
Everything, because it's got a huge implication to us. So normally I follow these, you know, back and forths, and, you know, like, we're not really that interested. This is very interesting for us because we have Filip Hrgović sitting at number 1 in the IBF position, which is in line to fight the winner of this. In fact, they'd ordered an interim very publicly. That's sort of been pulled back now because of what's going on, in case it doesn't get made. You know, so we're sitting there looking what's developing. I'm not saying we'd want that fight not to have an interest of boxing. It'd be great if it happens, but that would at least mean certainty that we can move ahead with our interim and then fight the winner. But if not, you know, we'll everyone will have to be quick because Philip wants to box. He's earned that number one shot via the eliminator system, which took a very long time. And so I'm following it intensely. I still have this feeling that they get it made. But if they do get it made, let's be honest, in 5 weeks' time? It's the heavyweight championship of the world at Wembley Stadium. I know it will probably sell out very quickly, but at the same time, the fighters need to know that the fight's on, don't they? I mean, they're in camp, aren't they? So it seems like a relatively short camp already for what is a very big fight. But I'm sure that Tyson's probably been ticking over, and so's Usyk. So it can still get made, but it's going to have to be very, very sharpish.
Do you lie blame with either Tyson or Alexander after hearing what you hear today? Obviously, there will be people who take a side of the fighter. Some people think Fury 70-30 was a bluff call. Some people seem to think that Usyk's now being a bit of a pain in negotiations. We don't really know, but do you kind of take a side with either?
No, and by the way, I can't. The fans have got the right to take a side at any time because ultimately we live for the fans. The fans, whether they love or hate a fighter, is the reason that boxing exists. So the fans can do what they want. What I do is, unfortunately, I've been in these situations before, making fights and the fight's delayed and it's not happening. And I don't blame anyone. I think everyone. It's a big fight. Everyone wants to have their piece. They're both champions. They both feel like they have championship rights. And that will then be down a question of negotiation. What I would say is that in defence of Tyson, if I understand the 70-30 part, I can't talk about the rematches and this, that and the other. I've got no idea whether it was a rematch for both sides that was suggested, whether it was for one side, I've got no idea. But I would say on the split is classically, and this was the case when many of the heavyweight championships, for example, were in Germany, the deal would be done on the basis of the territory from where the opponent was coming. So they keep those rights, the home fighter, Klitschko or Valuev, would keep those rights, and the rest of the world will be split up. Now, on the basis of that, it'll probably be an 80-20. So to say 70-30 is probably quite fair, but it's changed. Boxing's changed. There's global platforms like DAZN, not directly involved in this fight, but it's seen more as a global sport, whereas it used to be very much right. I remember making Valuev versus Hay, and it was very simple. David at the time kept the UK, we kept the rest of the world, and it was a quick way to make the fight, and that isn't really there anymore in that sense. So. But the thinking comes from Tyson will be saying, well, who sells out Wembley Stadium? Me. Who sells out? And he'll argue that he'll sell it out without Usyk. That would be his argumentation. He did 50,000 against Del Boy at Tottenham, and that will be in his head. And he'll think, well, how many bucks does he get on the gate without me? And that will be the thinking in the way they've approached it. So there is a logic behind it, and I can understand it. Is it for the fans frustrating from the outside? Of course. Does Usyk not get it? Of course. So it's a tricky one.
At the end of the day, just kind of, I suppose, in short, before we move on to one more thing I want to talk about, is it one of them things perhaps where a lot, maybe even egos need to just be put aside, and this fight just needs to be made for the good of the sport? I know, obviously, like you said, you got Philip in the IBF situation, but get this fight done. Let's see who wins. Let's see who comes out on top after it all, and then we can kind of move on.
But the ego points would be things like who walks first, who walks second. Often I've just said, let's do a coin toss. When it's clear it's two champions. I think the ego points. I've rarely seen a fight, despite the back and forth on gloves and corner.
Is that never a breakdown for a fight?
It's never really a break. I've never seen a big fight, for millions of dollars get called off because of the colour of the ring. It will be money, and then it gets to the point. It's a professional sport. They value it this way and they value it that way. So, it's unfortunately in all walks of business, but it does it reflect badly on our sport if the fight don't get made? Yeah, it doesn't look great, does it? Will we watch it when it eventually happens? Of course we will.
Just one more thing. I want to talk about something Misfits related quickly to finish. the thing with Wade and KSI and Mams, and now Wade not being involved in Misfits, just kind of your take on that whole situation. Obviously, I know there was a little bit said on Twitter. Can you just kind of give us kind of your side of events, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, it's really not my space, the social media world, but you know, I mean, you know, I think you know, JJ put out a thing on Twitter yesterday. He's human, you know. He sees someone who I assume, and this is an assumption, he assumes is close to him, but saying that his arch enemy would do bigger numbers against Floyd Mayweather, and he snapped. So what, right? Anthony Joshua snapped in the ring in Saudi and threw all the belts out the bloody ring, right? And I said at the time, you've just got, the guy's human, right? So what, he snaps. And, you know, he wears his heart on his sleeve, JJ. So KSI, he lives, breathes and thinks boxing. And people don't understand that part. That's what really intrigued me at the beginning when the first time I met him. He travels with his training, he lives the life of a professional boxer. He really gives everything to for the sport, and he takes it so seriously. So when someone in the social space comes out and says that, and I think there was a few other things, you know, he snapped. So what? You know, let's move on. You know, it wasn't that he criticised the performance and he snapped about that. He criticised about something that he took very personally. And can I see his angle? Yeah, I can. Should he have snapped? Well, we're human, you know. And I think it takes some bollocks to come out then afterwards. He showed balls to come out and say, yeah, no, I snapped and I was wrong to snap. But you know, I think a lot was made of it.
That's that well, though. A lot is made of everything in that world.
If that space drifts over into my space, then I realise, not being the most socially media active person on planet Earth, I realise that it's something big going on there, you know. So, you know, hopefully the dust settles soon.
Refuse to not be first.
Do we do enough? Well, I never shut up about it.
It must have been about 16, 17. We nicked their guilt rings. Right, the bouncer's guilt ring.
This is no good for me. That's the reality. If you want the honest truth, and I see it every day,